Welcome to the video program, Suspected Unapproved Parts. What can you do? To begin, let's hear from Jane Garvey, the Administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration.
Hello, my name is Jane Garvey. First of all, I want to thank you for your dedication to quality and best practices. What each of you does is important and makes a critical difference to aviation safety. The FAA feels very strongly about the potential safety risk posed by unapproved parts. It is our expectation, it is our standard that every single part used on aircraft be approved for that purpose. We are absolutely committed to remove the threat of unapproved parts to aviation safety. Yet we at the FAA cannot do this alone. We can do it with you. At every step of the process, from the initial purchase of a part to its final installation, everyone involved plays an important role and can help maintain the high standards of safety that we have today. Since we initiated our Suspected Unapproved Parts Program Office in 1995, we have had tremendous cooperation from all areas of private industry. To beat this problem, it's more important than ever before that we maintain this high level of cooperation. This video outlines how you can help and describes how the FAA and industry can work together more closely and cooperatively.
This video was created as the result of a partnership between the FAA and private industry to increase awareness regarding the problem of suspected unapproved parts and explain specific actions that each person can take to help solve the problem. Here is Ken Riley, the manager of the Suspected Unapproved Parts Program Office.
The Suspected Unapproved Parts Program is an essential part of the Federal Aviation Administration and the civil aviation industry. It is critical to the industry to ensure that only approved parts are used in aircraft. This basic principle will maintain aviation as the safest mode of transportation today. The FAA cannot do this alone. We need your help. Every individual, from those manufacturing or purchasing the part to those installing the parts, plays an important role. Without this cooperative effort, the risk of unapproved parts entering the civil aviation system will only increase. That is why we are reaching out to each of you today for your support and diligence in addressing this important issue.
Now let's hear from the Deputy Associate Administrator for Regulation and Certification, Margaret Gilligan.
The important thing to remember is that aviation safety is everybody's business.
It is clear that the FAA thinks unapproved parts are an issue. But what about industry? Let's hear from Randy Milne and Peter Gallimore.
There are persons and entities purposefully engaged in the manufacture of non-conforming, flight-critical, unapproved parts. It's for this reason that I believe the industry is right on in considering the entire population of unapproved parts as a real risk to flight safety.
All of us are determined, and I'm talking about manufacturers, airlines, and repair stations. We're all determined to eliminate completely unapproved parts.
What are you doing to ensure that no improper parts are installed on aircraft? If you replace a propeller drive gear, do you make sure that the part was produced by an FAA production approval holder or came from an FAA-approved source? If you work for an air carrier, a repair station, a parts supplier, a distributor, or anyone else in the aviation industry, you can help. Know your organization's supply system. Know what your responsibility is to determine parts condition and documentation requirements. Watch for suspicious parts. Report any suspicious parts to the FAA. Criminals who traffic in substandard aircraft parts are attempting to avoid the monitoring systems of both industry and the FAA. As a result, there is a concentrated effort by both industry and the FAA to keep unapproved parts out of the aviation community. In August 1995, the FAA convened a task force and instituted a Suspected Unapproved Parts, or SUP, program to proactively address the problem by providing inspector training, distributing information, enhancing reporting procedures, instituting aggressive enforcement procedures, and processing investigations. What are the risks of using unapproved parts? Most importantly, using an unapproved part on type-certificated aircraft can jeopardize the safety of passengers and crew. One substandard bearing seal spacer could initiate a series of failures that result in the total internal failure of an engine during flight. Unapproved parts can undermine the structural and operational integrity of an aircraft, causing increased stress on all components over time.
But I assure you, there's none of us in this industry can take that risk. You don't know when that clock's going to run out, and when the true nature or inequities of that unapproved part show up and affect that aircraft or its operation. So the job of us all, of course, is no unapproved parts on aircraft.
By using unapproved parts, however unintentionally, manufacturers and operators risk their reputations. If a failure occurs, they are automatically held responsible, and their reputations can be severely damaged.
Anytime an unapproved part gets into the press, whether by a finding or by a report or by a whistleblower or by virtue of an incident or an accident, then automatically you are guilty until proven innocent.
When a part fails in an aircraft, it's the name of the operator of the aircraft and the manufacturer that is embedded in the minds of the public, regardless of who was responsible for the manufacture of the unapproved part that failed.
Legal action brought against airlines or manufacturers can damage or even disable their operations, whether or not they are responsible. There are also economic implications. If an air operator finds unapproved parts on their planes, it must pay the cost of removing the part and possibly delaying or canceling flights. If a repair station finds that it has used unapproved parts, the cost of recalls, parts failures, and/or stoppage of production may result. The FAA recognizes 3 categories for all parts. An approved part has been designed, produced, and maintained in accordance with FAA regulations and has the documentation to prove it. Approved parts are the only types of parts that are authorized for installation on U.S. registered type-certificated aircraft. An unapproved part is defined by the FAA as not meeting any one of the requirements of an approved part. In other words, if there is any impropriety in the design, production, maintenance, or documentation of a part, it may be unapproved and should not be used until substantiated. A suspected unapproved part, or SUP, is a part that is suspected of not meeting the requirements of an approved part. In other words, these parts may be deficient in quality or lack documentation to show where and how they were made. These parts must be isolated when they are discovered. Typically, FAA-approved parts are produced under a type certificate, or TC, a production certificate, or PC, a technical standard order, or TSO authorization, a parts manufacturer approval, or PMA. Usually, a manufacturer must possess a parts manufacturer approval, or PMA, for each part that it makes. Be aware of 2 special cases. Parts made for foreign aircraft registered in the U.S. must be made under a bilateral agreement with the air operator's country of origin. The FAA also recognizes what's known as a standard part. These parts could include fasteners, nuts, and bolts that have been manufactured in compliance with recognized industry standards. But beware, since bona fide standard parts are automatically approved, in some cases manufacturers may take the expedient route of representing certain parts as standard, when in fact these are parts that should be subject to quality assurance and FAA surveillance. In other cases, parts represented as standard are only standard for a particular manufacturer. All of these parts should be identified through appropriate markings and documents that can be verified by the FAA during routine inspections.
When we start an aircraft or aircraft parts building operation, we have to demonstrate to the FAA that our quality system is going to assure that we build parts, the same parts each time, that conform to the type design that we have and are in a condition for safe operation. An approved quality system is what a manufacturer of aeronautical parts has to have in place in order to be able to not only produce but sell those parts or deliver those parts.
Industry and government have joined forces to fight the problem of unapproved parts. In 1994, a group of more than 40 representatives of manufacturers, operators, repair stations, and distributors came together to form the Industry Suspected Unapproved Parts Steering Group. They conducted an extensive study of areas relevant to aircraft parts, including the approval process, buying and selling practices, and documentation procedures. And their recommendations to the FAA have made a significant contribution to elimination of unapproved parts. In November 1995, the FAA created the SUP Program Office, AVR 20, to serve as a single point of contact for information and guidance on the SUP program. The goal of this office is to not only prevent unapproved parts from entering the aviation system and being installed on aircraft, but to purge the system of any unapproved parts. AVR 20 maintains SUP-related information and works in close coordination with law enforcement agencies to achieve these goals. The Aviation Rulemaking Advisory Committee Parts Approval Action Team is an industry-based organization that deals with the unapproved parts question as it affects operators and repair stations. The Airline Suppliers Association is an organization concerned with those companies involved in selling parts, such as brokers, dealers, and surplus sales organizations. Their voluntary accreditation program is described in FAA Advisory Circular 0056. This program enables this group to demonstrate conformance to a quality system standard sanctioned by the FAA. These organizations are working to solve the problem, but ultimately, manufacturers, distributors, and repair stations are in the best position to prevent such parts from ever entering the system. Here's what you can do. Know your supplier. At a minimum, a legitimate supplier should have a publicly listed address and telephone number. If you are purchasing from a new supplier, ask to see what certification they provide and how they assure the quality and documentation of parts they ship before you conduct business with them. Be wary of suppliers who produce parts for non-aviation industries or who produce parts off-site.
Knowing your supplier is the first line of defense, in our view.
I guess if there's one thought that I'd like to put out relative to approved parts, it's know thy supplier.
It is vital to this whole business of cleaning up all the unapproved parts and eliminating them entirely from the industry for the future, to know your supplier.
I like to use the old adage related to the duck. You know, it may look like a duck, it may walk like a duck, but it may not fly like one. Know your supplier.
Examine parts. If you are a production approval holder, you are required by regulation to have proper procedures and test equipment in place to verify that the parts you produce meet type design. Every repair station must have a receiving inspection system that verifies the integrity of all parts before they are installed. OEM part numbers alone do not guarantee approval. There are many signs to watch for that signal a part may in fact be unapproved. Wrong logos or trademarks, false, missing, or improperly attached data plates, incorrect or missing part and serial numbers, including military part numbers, identification tags that have stampovers on part or serial numbers, required markings that are improperly located, an altered or unusual finish, or non-standard packaging. A part with any of these characteristics should be regarded as a SUP and should not be installed unless appropriately verified. If you are a distributor, you should have documentation that traces the history of all the parts that you sell. Examine paperwork. Paperwork holds important clues as to the legitimacy of a part. For repaired parts, FAA regulations require that there be paperwork certifying airworthiness. Examine all documentation carefully to make sure that it is complete and genuine. You might have reason to suspect fraud if you see a wrong letterhead, illegible or missing signatures, or signatures of people who don't exist, backdated documents, tests that postdate shipment, or an understatement of life limits, whiteouts, military part numbers changed to civilian numbers, or data that doesn't accurately reflect part condition. Be alert to all of the possibilities.
All parts that are manufactured by manufacturers for installation on type certificated products in the aftermarket are supposed to have associated paperwork attesting to their airworthiness, whether coming from a foreign country or from within the United States.
Demand assurance. If you purchase parts, you are entitled to demand assurance from your supplier that all their parts meet the requirements of an approved part and comply with regulations. This will help to ensure your compliance with the FAA regulations when installing these parts. Knowing your supplier is one of the most reliable defenses against unapproved parts.
As a buyer of aeronautical parts, an individual has to make sure that he's dealing with a credible source. So he should ensure that that supplier can provide him with the documentation necessary to prove that he's an approved supplier and he has the credibility, the credentials, and can give him only approved parts.
Be suspicious of prices too good to be true. Prices well under market price may be an indicator that the part may be unapproved. Such parts may be scrap or over life limits parts that have been reworked and possibly given false documentation. The solution? If the price is too good to be true, check carefully. Several types of documentation can verify that a part is approved. If the part comes from a production approval holder with a production certificate, parts manufacturer approval, technical standard order, or approved production inspection system, it should be accompanied by appropriate documentation. Acceptable documentation includes FAA Form 8130-3 and a material or product certification statement from the company if it is signed by an authorized person. If the part comes by direct shipment from a company that supplies parts to a production approval holder, look for appropriate forms of direct ship authority, such as an authorization letter. For parts that have come through an approved repair station, the expected documentation is Form 8130-3. You can also accept a maintenance release tag if it is signed by the repairing organization and contains an FAA-approved repair station number. For parts imported from Joint Aviation Authority member countries, JAA Form 1 should be attached. If the part is from Canada, the equivalent documentation is Transport Canada Form 240078. And if purchasing standard parts, insist on either a company certification statement or test reports. A rule of thumb when handling parts is when in doubt, don't install, investigate. Now for some closing thoughts.
The FAA needs the continued support and help from the civil aviation industry in addressing this very important issue. And we need to continue to work and foster that partnership.
As we address the issues that are related to unapproved parts, we've come to rely on working with our industry partners. The only way we can be certain that we're getting the right kind of parts into the system is to be certain that the industry is ordering approved parts, that they have processes for receiving parts to determine that they're properly approved, that the only parts they're keeping on their shelves are parts that are approved, and that they've got the training in place for their employees to make sure that the parts are properly installed for the purpose and function that they need to fill.
Remember, as an individual, you could be held personally liable for parts you install. The FAA maintains a website to keep you informed of SUP issues. The web address is printed on the slipcase for this video. The site provides easy access to an electronic version of the SUP reporting form, the SUP advisory circular, handbook bulletins, flight standards information bulletins, and unapproved parts notifications. You can also link to useful sites that provide detailed information on parts manufacturer approval holders and accredited distributors. If you have information for the FAA regarding suspected unapproved parts, call the hotline at 1-800-255-1111. The hotline number is also printed on the slipcase for this video. The installation of unapproved parts on aircraft jeopardizes the entire aviation industry. Never install a part that is suspect. Be fully confident that the parts you install meet the FAA definition of an approved part.
It is the cooperative efforts by you, our aviation partners, and the FAA that are making a difference with unapproved parts. Thank you for watching this video, and thank you for everything that you're doing to make flying even safer.